By the end of this video, you are going to know the answer to where the bodies fell on the night of the Boston Massacre. And you are going to know the identity of the man who drew this. In 1770, this street plan of the Boston Massacre was created to show the locations of the bodies in King Street. And you might not realize it right now, but you definitely know the person who drew this. So stick around to the end of this video to find out for sure, but in the meantime, take a guess. Go ahead, I'll wait. Write in the comments below who you think drew this map to the massacre. Hi everybody, it's me, Katie. Welcome back to my channel where it is all Revolutionary War all the time. For those of you who have been here before, I am so happy to have you back. And if you're new here, then welcome. I am a Revolutionary War researcher, writer, and speaker, and this channel is a fun and friendly place where I share my research. Also on this channel, and fasten your seatbelts because we embark on historical action adventures. We venture out to all sorts of places, battlefields, burying grounds, even city streets where events of the American Revolution actually happened. Okay, so now kind of coming down Bunker Hill. This is the same direction that the provincial troops traveled on June 17th. After they crossed the neck, ascended Bunker Hill, they would have started to come down the other side. If you would like to come along on these adventures, then I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel. Back to March 5th, 1770, the night of the bloody massacre. At about 9:30 p.m. on the night of March 5th, 1770, British troops fired upon a crowd of civilians who had gathered in King Street, Boston. 11 men and boys were shot. 6 of them ultimately died. 3 of them died a little later from their injuries, while the other 3 were killed where they stood. Where exactly did those 3 bodies fall? Who were these men? And where exactly in King Street were they standing when they got killed? On that night, an angry crowd congregated in the middle of King Street, and their hostility was directed at a lone British sentry who stood on the steps of the custom house. The sentry, just a few moments before, had gotten into an altercation with a young Boston apprentice. They had exchanged some angry words and some insults, and the sentry clubbed the young apprentice on the head with the butt of his musket. And this caused the apprentice to stagger around the street holding his head, crying. This drew attention. So let's set the stage. This is an 1801 painting showing what was King Street in 1770 and what is State Street now. Now, the building here in the middle, kind of the brownish building, still stands, and perhaps many of you have visited it. In 1770, it was referred to as the townhouse. It was built in 1713, and it looks exactly the same today, except it's surrounded by skyscrapers. And that's part, I think, of what gives Boston its charm. But I am a little biased. Now, this red building here on your right is the Custom House. And this is the exact location where the British sentry was standing on the night of March 5th. But keep in your mind's eye, particularly where this Custom House is located and this whole open square area, because it is here that the crowd congregated and that their attention was focused. Now, even before that night's altercation between the sentry and the apprentice, there had already been a ton of tumult in the streets of Boston on the night of March 5th. It was already a wild night in Boston with people fighting in the streets, even worse than after a Bruins game. Boston had been a hotbed of animosity between the British troops and civilians. So tensions in town had been escalating. Case in point, a few days before the shooting in King Street on March 5th, there had been some all-out brawls between British soldiers and local Boston guys. In particular, some rope workers who worked at a rope walks in Boston. And it had begun with some insults being hurled and then escalated to brawling, and it resulted in the Boston rope workers successfully driving off a larger number of British troops. Now, this incident festered on both sides, and in the hours immediately preceding the shooting, there had been reports of more fighting between soldiers and civilians. Civilians accused soldiers of running amok around town, slashing at people with their bayonets. And soldiers accused civilians of attacking them in alleyways and beating them with clubs and cudgels. So it was already a turbulent night, and eventually these crowds, these people all begin to congregate in King Street, just outside the Custom House, where the lone sentry has been standing. Now, let's look at our drawing made again in 1770 by, don't forget to put your guess as to who drew this in the comments below. Here up at the top in the middle is the townhouse, and that's that brownish brick building that still stands today. Then down a little and on your right is the Custom House, and you'll note there is a little set of steps right out in front of it. That is the red building that you saw earlier in the painting. Soon, British Captain Thomas Preston, with 7 soldiers under his command, come down past the townhouse. They march down here, pushing through the crowd of Bostonians, and they all arrive here at the Custom House, where they stand together facing the crowd. Now, the soldiers are depicted here in our drawing by this little array of circles. Each tiny circle represents a British soldier, and each of those teeny tiny lines represents a gun. Now, there is a lot more to tell about what happened this night, about the crowd and what they were doing and saying, but I want to get to the actual shooting in this video, so I'm glossing over some things, but we can cover them later. Now, we all know what happens next. It's a very kind of familiar story to all of us. Famously, the crowd starts screaming at the soldiers. They start hurling chunks of ice and wood and snowballs and oyster shells. The soldiers' muskets are actually rattling because of the debris that is raining down on them from the crowd. It is about 9:15 on a Monday night. There's about a foot of snow on the ground, and it is crowded and dark. People are jostling, yelling, heavy things are flying, bayonets are flashing, and 11 people are about to get shot. Suddenly, British muskets explode. Fire erupts from the muzzles of the muskets, and for a second, everything is illuminated, lighting up a terrible scene. Confusion reigns. Over the next few moments, several people fall to the ground, killed or wounded. One man, Edward Payne, is standing here on the doorstep of his house when musket balls fly through his doorframe and his arm, 2 men and 1 boy, a teenage boy, die where they stood. The first to fall, Crispus Attucks, very famous name in American history. He was a 47-year-old man of African and indigenous ancestry. He was standing at the very front of the crowd, closest to the British troops when they fired. He was shot in the chest and dropped to the ground. And here on our street plan, you can see how extremely close he is to the soldiers. And we know that it's Crispus Attucks because the creator of the drawing indicated Attucks with an A. Very close by him, Boston rope worker Samuel Gray. Now, interestingly, he was one of the Boston guys who had been brawling with the British soldiers at the rope works. And immediately, Samuel Gray dropped to the ground, having been shot in the head. And he, like Crispus Attucks, were amongst those at the very front of the crowd. Now, the third victim, the third person to die in King Street where he stood, was a 17-year-old named James Caldwell. He wasn't from Boston. He was working as a sailor. He was standing further back, not up at the very front of the crowd, probably out in the middle of the street, and he was shot in the chest and died on the spot. So here on our map, we have the locations of the first 3 victims of the Boston Massacre to die. Those that, as best as we can tell, died instantaneously. As I said, more people did die. It was not just these three, and more people were also wounded than died. There was another 17-year-old who died that night, but he lingered for a few hours at his mother's house before dying. But these 3, Crispus Attucks, Samuel Gray, and James Caldwell, passed away almost immediately. If you enjoyed this video and if you'd like more, let me know by clicking the like button. And again, I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel so you don't miss out on any of our historical action adventures. You thought I forgot, didn't you? I didn't forget. 5 years before taking his famous midnight ride, Paul Revere drew this map of the scene of the bloody massacre. Thank you all so much for watching.